Now, you might have heard of something called TTIP recently, but perhaps not given it much thought. The European Union and the US have spent 3 years trying to negotiate a massive trade deal. As advocates say, it would boost European income significantly. Its critics say it could, among many things, undermine workers' rights and lead to GM food being imported here. Irish farmers too are worried it could destroy their incomes. Kevin Purcell reports.
Farmers protesting today at the EU Commission offices in Dublin. Their target, a trade deal currently being negotiated between the US and the EU that's said to be the biggest in the world. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, or TTIP as it's known, will set out rules and standards for removing trade barriers and liberalising the market between the two trade partners. Advocates say the deal would open up the US market to EU firms, cut red tape and boost local economies. A 2015 report prepared for the Department of Jobs, Enterprise and Innovation said the deal would have an overall very positive impact on the Irish economy, while increasing the national income by around €2.5 billion. However, the report sees the main benefits in the manufacturing sector, with limited impacts in agriculture and food, and increased competition from cost-effective US beef producers. It's this last point that has the farmers worried.
It will decimate incomes of Irish farmers and will make it unviable as an industry. And I also add that the Irish economy is very vulnerable too, because it's so dependent on our beef industry also.
One of the biggest concerns about TTIP is the secrecy surrounding it. European politicians can only view the text in a secure reading room in Brussels. Irish MEP Luke Ming Flanagan recently filmed himself trying to access the documents.
We have to go in very quickly.
Yes.
In case anyone who voted for me might see something they're not meant to see. I am not allowed to accurately write it down. So as an MEP, I'm being asked to do a dodgy job of transcribing this, and then that'll be okay. I've also been told that I can tell it in my own words. Well, if I choose that my own words be identical to the words on these, I'll have broken some law. Welcome to the European Union.
Despite the heavy security, some of the draft text was leaked by Greenpeace. The group fears that standards in food and agriculture could be lowered as key regulations are not included in the documents. It's something the EU's chief negotiator denies.
The fact that it is not mentioned in a particular consolidated text means nothing.
The leaks are a setback for negotiators who wanted to wrap up some key agreements by the end of President Obama's term in office. The remaining US presidential candidates have voiced concerns over the deal, as has France and Germany in recent days. All of this uneasiness means the very future of TTIP could now be in doubt. Kevin Purcell, Ireland Live News at 10.
Well, earlier I spoke to Dr. Cara Augustenborg from Friends of the Earth and the MEP Brian Hayes, who's in Brussels. I put it to Brian Hayes the concern that TTIP could ultimately benefit big business at the expense of ordinary citizens.
Well, I reject the premise of your question that there's a proposed deal. There isn't a proposed deal. What there is an ongoing negotiation. It's no different to the 1,000 other agreements that Ireland enters into in terms of bilateral relationships we have all over the world. In this case, it's much bigger because it involves the United States of America and the EU. But every step along the road towards a potential agreement has to be ratified by the European Parliament. So this notion that there's a deal, that's absolute nonsense. And there again, it's put out by the hard left and the hard right. The people who are in favour of tearing down the chances for more jobs in Ireland are people like Donald Trump, Nigel Farage, Mrs Le Pen, the National Front, Sinn Féin and other people, the hard left and the hard right. They have come together in a populist coalition to oppose what is a sensible thing. Now, what I'm saying is this. I have seen no deal. There is no deal. There is an ongoing negotiation. And the clever, smart thing to do is to wait till the end of that negotiation until we come to a measured view as to whether or not that deal should be passed. If it's passed by the European Parliament, it then will have to be passed by every other member state across the 28 member states by their parliaments. So we're a long way from a negotiated settlement on this. And that's why a lot of the kind of populist rhetoric you're hearing is simply that. It's people making noise for the sake of it, not actually dealing with the substance of the issue, but just wanting to oppose it for the sake of opposing it. It's not about TTIP, it's about lots of other things. And I think we obtained that quite clearly in the most recent election as well.
Cara of Friends of the Earth, according to Brian Hayes, you're engaged in populist rhetoric. Are you in the same category as Donald Trump and Nigel Farage?
Good, I hope not. But if we want to talk about jobs for Ireland, I mean, the Irish Department of Jobs and Innovation and Enterprise commissioned a study by Copenhagen Economics on the impact of TTIP for Ireland. And in it, they found that the biggest winners for TTIP is in the pharmaceutical sector, which we know is one of the lower employers. They only employ 10,000 people in Ireland. So while they're a big contributor to GDP, a lot of it is multinational benefit that's going back to the United States. And the big losers in terms of enterprise in Ireland is going to be agriculture, which Gael says is our most valued indigenous sector. And that is the one that is going to take the hit in Ireland and across Europe in terms of what TTIP will do.
But are you being presumptuous? Brian Hayes says the deal hasn't been done. There is no deal. There's no proposed deal. This is simply a round of negotiations. It will take time. And you should reserve judgment, perhaps, until we get to the stage where there's something more concrete.
So everything has been done quite secretively, and it's only because we have leaked texts from people like Greenpeace that we now know that what's on the table right now is that the U.S. wants to trade EU cars being allowed into America for U.S. agriculture being allowed into Europe. And the U.S. Produces agriculture in a more intensive way, which means it's cheaper, which means that our own indigenous agriculture can't compete on price with what the U.S. will be bringing in as a result of TTIP.
I'll just put that to Brian Hayes in Brussels. Brian, the Irish cattle and sheep farmers came out today and said that a TTIP deal would be devastating for Irish beef exports. A report carried out for the Department of Trade here last year said that Irish beef producers should prepare for increased competition from the US. There's a lot to lose here for Irish farmers, isn't there?
Well, there's a lot to be gained for the country. You referred earlier to the Copenhagen position. What they said, not politicians, not NGOs, what they said that the country could get up to 10,000 extra new jobs, that that could lead to about a 1.1% increase in GDP, which is more tax revenue in for our schools, our hospitals, and all the things we need. Yes, they said there are going to be challenges in agriculture, of that there is no doubt, but they said in 6 of the 8 key categories, right the way across the economy, not just pharmaceuticals, as some people are maintaining, that there was going to be key net improvements in employment. But the key issue is this, you know, we are going to have an agreement before we sign it. I'm not going to sign away a circumstance where we're going to be in a worse position. I've been told from people that it's going to lead to a derogation of our standards. That's not the case. The key issue that we are going to ensure is that EU standards will prevail if this is possible. Now, the truth of the matter is this. We need this in the EU more than the USA. Why? Because our growth is slack and we have twice the number of people unemployed. We need to open up our economies across the European Union to trade. That's the best way to generate income back into Ireland and other parts of the European Union.
Cara, the EU Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström said, look, there's nothing to worry about here. The Greenpeace leaks are a ball of smoke. After each negotiating round we publish our position papers. It's open and transparent in so much as a trade deal can be at this stage. Is this not just scaremongering then?
No, I don't think it's open and transparent enough. I mean, we live in an internet age. We could have everything much more transparent than they're doing it. We have 2 million citizens in Europe who have signed a petition to block TTIP. We have another 150,000 who actually submitted consultations, 97% of which said they did not want TTIP to go ahead. I actually think the US needs this agreement more than Europe does, and particularly in Ireland. Our biggest exporter is the EU, and now we're going to be competing with US products coming into the EU for those exports.
What's your big concern when it comes to talk of harmonising standards? What would you envisage being sold here in Europe from the US that isn't currently being made
Well, the
available?
EU regulations are generally more stringent than US regulations, particularly around things like food. The EU adopts what they call the precautionary principle, while the US takes a more risk-based approach where they're willing to accept a certain level of risk that we are not able to accept.
Will we see GM food and cloned cattle and all
It's
that?
a potential. I mean, most of what TTIP is about deregulation, and it's not actually about tariffs. So how are we going to resolve issues like, say, gun control, where the EU is more stringent, or GM products or anything? It's unclear, and because the negotiations haven't been transparent enough, we haven't seen how that's going to be resolved. And what we've been told by the negotiators is they're going to leave all of those tricky issues until the end, which just isn't good enough.
Brian Hayes, isn't that the nub of the issue for many people? They simply do not trust the EU negotiators to deliver a deal that they're happy with. There's a lack of transparency. People need to hear more detail.
Well, there's more transparency in this deal than there ever was in any other trade deal. I mean, once again, the lies are put out there about we'll accept in growth hormoned beef. That's a complete red line issue for the EU. Another lie that was put out there in terms of GMOs, that we were going to concede on that. That's a red line issue for the EU. And in terms of our standards in agriculture and food, we're not diminishing that. There will still be absolute rights for governments across the European Union in terms of public policy decisions to continue. But look, let's agree on one thing. Let's stop the cheap publicity. Let's allow the negotiators to continue. And then we have a deal. And then it's a matter for the European Union, through the EU Parliament, and each of the member states to come to a view on. That's all I'm asking people to do. Don't come to a situation on a prejudice basis. Allow the position to be negotiated. And that's really all I'm asking to do. I've a reserved position on TTIP. I'll wait and see what the final outcome is. But I certainly am going to take a decision if it's in the interest of my country. And that's going to be part and parcel of negotiations and discussions I'll have with my constituents.
Cara, finally, is this deal not actually dead in the water? We have Francois Hollande saying he's not going to sign up to it. The French Minister for Foreign Trade has said it's a very bad deal for France and for Europe. Is it really going to get over the line, do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, there are people like Brian Hayes and the Obama administration that are trying to fast track this through, so I wouldn't say it's necessarily dead in the water, though I hope it would be. I mean, our biggest concern is this idea of the investor courts, where investors can potentially sue governments for missing out on profits if governments change their regulations or whatnot to protect consumer safety. And none of this has been addressed. This is endemic in every trade agreement, and people like Brian Hayes aren't telling us why this is necessary. It's a big concern, and I think we still need to be concerned about TTIP no matter what.
Dr. Cara Augustenborg from Friends of the Earth and the MEP Brian Hayes talking to me earlier tonight.